Hello guys, ASHIT Gameplays, I'm Fabio Pisco, and welcome to my channel, and today I bring you one of the most requested videos recently, which is the how to overclock and undervolt the RX 9070 XT. And yeah, I already know that most countries don't have stock, and I already know that the ones that have stock have price hikes that are insane, but that's how it works. When the demand is very high and the product doesn't really have enough stock, the prices will hike. Sadly, that's how it works. And of course, as soon as stores stop having the cards like flying from their shelves, the prices will come back or come down to what they should be. But that's a different story, of course, not related to this video. Now, one of the reasons I took so long to make this video is that these cards are slightly different in terms of overclocking and undervolting, and several things changed, so I actually had to, well, test the cards a bit more, or in this case test this card a bit more, in order to see how it actually works, how it performs, how it reacts to the offsets, to the overclocking, and so on, so on, so on. So let's get into it. The first thing that you have to do is just right click on your desktop and you'll have the AMD software ADRENALIN edition link. This tab will appear, or this menu will appear, the home menu, and in this case I have the capture controls and the microphone and so on because of course, yeah, I'm recording. And you have now the AMD chat and so on that you can see in this video passing right now on the screen, and several other things. What you want to do here is go to the performance menu, just click on it, open it, then you have three sub-menus which are the metrics, tuning and settings, and you want to go to the tuning one. And as for the tuning presets, things are already different. You have now favor efficiency, favor performance, and the custom mode. And then we have the automatic tuning, and we now only have the overclock GPU, we don't really have the undervolt and so on. So things are slightly different now. What you firstly want to do is just go to custom, and then you accept. Accept what? Today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is AliExpress, with lots of awesome products that you can pick anytime. Like the Monsgeek M1 V3, a wireless keyboard with a simple and beautiful design, with the keycaps having different color tones and the letters on the side of the keycaps instead of the top, which I enjoy much more than I thought I would. The possibility of choosing your preferred colors as well, switches and keycaps, and an outstanding sound isolation and noise reduction. I mean, just hear these clicks. And it comes with all the bells and whistles, like tons of accessories, customizable key colors and macros, and the ability to upload your profiles or download other users' ones. And so far this is my second favorite keyboard in between all the ones that I tested for both gaming and productivity. Use my new codes for additional discounts on AliExpress, getting up to $70 off your fantastic purchase. What you firstly want to do is just go to custom, and then you accept. Then you just start enabling all the sliders. Basically enabled, 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 this one as well. Yeah, actually on these cards you don't really need to enable the advanced mode because you already have it right here. It is what it is. So as I told you, these cards have different settings compared to RDNA 3, which are the RX 7000 series, and RDNA 2, which are the RX 6000 series. For example, on the GPU tuning part, we now, instead of having the minimum and maximum frequency, we now have only the maximum frequency offset. So it is not determining the maximum frequency, it is just the offset and the voltage offset as well. And everything else is quite the same. Still, with this all said, the first thing that you want to do is go to the power tuning, and this is one of the most, if not the most important thing. Again, the power tuning. All you have to do if you want to really take the most advantage of your card in terms of performance, you don't really care much about power draw or temperatures, even though that if your card is actually a good model, the temperatures won't be an issue because these cards are really, really cool. But if you want the maximum performance you can get, you just get the power limit and you raise it to the maximum. In this case, I have the Sapphire Pure, and the power limit is at maximum of 10%. Depending on the model that you have, the power limit might be slightly higher, like 15%, in some models maybe 20%, but in this case it is 10%. And in some other models it might be like 5% only, so it depends on your model. The Sapphire Pure lets me go up to 50 watts, to 10%, sorry. And by the way, the total board power is at 51 watts because we're recording using the card. Otherwise, the total board power would be like 10 watts. But again, I'm recording, so it is at 50 watts. Don't worry, because this won't really happen to you. Now you might ask, well, but why is the power limit so important?
I don't know.
Well, first of all, recent cards work with boost clocks, and since they work with boost clocks, it kind of means that the card will reach the maximum amount of frequency it can get inside that power roof. Meaning that if you have 300 watts, in that specific game the card will boost to its maximum frequency till it hits 300 watts. And if you have like 350 watts, it will just do the same. It will try to hit the maximum frequency on that scenario inside or up to 350 watts, if you're not CPU bottlenecked, of course. And if you have 400 watts, 250 watts, doesn't really matter. The card will go to the maximum frequency it can get inside that power limit. So if you raise that same power limit, it means that the card will be able to boost more. Let's say this card goes up to 315 watts or something like that at stock, and if I raise the power limit 10%, it goes up to 350 watts. I've seen games, really heavy games, playing at 4K or 1440p ultra wide, where the card, for example, at stock, at 315 watts, it goes up to 2.8, 2.9 gigahertz. But as soon as I just raise the power limit, so without messing around with anything else, I raise the power limit, and the clock speeds immediately raise, let's say from 2.8 or 2.9 to 3.0 or 3.1 gigahertz. So automatically we have, let's say, 100, 200 megahertz of boost. And if your card actually has a way higher power limit, it means that the boost will also get higher, which is why the power tuning is so important if you are just going for the maximum performance that you can get. So again, raising the power limit will automatically increase the clock speeds, which will automatically increase your FPS numbers unless you're CPU bottlenecked. That's how it works. Now, as for the fan tuning, we have the GPU temperature, the GPU hotspot temperature, which is very important. Then we have the 0 RPM option, and we have the maximum fan speed. Usually the fans are very quiet, at least in the Sapphire Pure. In your case, if your fans are quiet, you don't really need to mess around with this, but if you're having the fans kind of ramping up, you might want to mess a bit with the fan speed, or at least the maximum fan speed. Still, I found no issues here, so I will leave it alone. But you can even make your custom fan speed profiles. You can do several things. In this case, I'll just leave it at 100% because it just works. And now we go to the GPU tuning, which is one of the most important parts that you can get here, with the first one being the power tuning and the second one being the GPU tuning. And as you can see, things changed quite a bit now. While previously you had the minimum frequency and the maximum frequency, and then you had the voltage, now you have the maximum frequency offset in megahertz, and then the voltage offset in millivolts. And if you saw my previous videos on how to overclock RDNA 2 or RDNA 3 cards, I told you several times that the voltage that you had there wasn't actually wasn't actually the voltage that the card would use. It was kind of an offset, meaning that the card had a base voltage, and then when you were messing around with a frequency or with a certain frequency or a certain voltage, the card would adjust that same base voltage based on the voltage that you inserted, which is kind of confusing for people that don't really understand how this works, meaning that the lower the voltage you inserted, the lower the base voltage would get, because you had kind of a lower target voltage. Again, it is quite confusing for people that don't understand how it works, and that's why I believe AMD did this, and they did this very well. So instead of having the voltage and people thinking that that voltage that they are choosing is the voltage that will apply in all scenarios, no, they now just have the voltage offset, meaning that the voltage will vary in terms of clock frequency. Imagine you now have 656 640, 650 millivolts, and we have a clock speed of 100 megahertz. But as soon as the clock speed goes up, the voltage will go up as well. Now, if you just go here and go like minus 50 millivolts or 40 millivolts, yeah, minus 40 millivolts, and you go to apply, you can see that the voltage in this state didn't really change. We still have the same 640, 630 millivolts, which means that it didn't change that much. But as soon as you go to higher frequency steps, or higher, like 3 gigahertz, like 3.1, 3.2, 2.8, doesn't really matter. As soon as you go to the 3D states of frequency, the voltage offset will apply. So let's say that you're playing a game and you have a certain frequency, and at that certain frequency you would have 1040 millivolts. As soon as you apply the offset of minus 40 millivolts, you would go from 1040 millivolts to 1000 millivolts, which is basically 1 volt. And I believe that's how it works. At least from what I tested, it is how it works most times. It doesn't apply to all steps, it doesn't really apply to all frequencies, but mostly when you're gaming, this is how it works. But now there's another tricky thing, because these cards work with boost clocks, and this leads us to another thing that is also important. So remember what I told you about the power draw, that the card boosts to the maximum frequency it can get inside a certain amount of power. What happens is that as soon as you decrease or you undervolt, because this is undervolting because you are going below the standard voltage, it means that at the same frequency you have lower voltage, and if at the same frequency you have lower voltage, it means that you have lower power draw. So if you have lower power draw, it means that the card will be able to boost a bit higher inside that same power limit. And yeah, again, this might be really confusing, but it's basically, since you are undervolting, the card will consume less power. And if the card will consume less power, it means that the card can boost higher frequencies at the same power limit that you had before. Let's say that we had the card pushing 3.1 GHz, but as soon as you go to minus 40 millivolts, the card will be able to, instead of pushing 3.1 GHz, will be able to push, let's say, 3.2 or 3.25 GHz, because again, you are reducing the power draw by undervolting, meaning that at the same power draw, the card can achieve higher frequencies. In my case, the lower I could get was like minus 40 millivolts. As soon as I started winning way below that, like minus 50, minus 60, it would work in some games, but in others it would crash. So the minimum value that I could go was like minus 40. So I would advise you to start at, let's say, minus 20, then minus 30, and if you have no black screens, no crashes whatsoever, you can go to minus 40. And if you still have no crashes, no black screens, you can go to minus 50, minus 60, so on till your card crashes. If your card crashes, let's say at minus 60, just go back to minus 50 and just do it. If your card somehow crashes in some of the games that you are testing right now at minus 50, just go back to minus 40 in order to ensure stability. That's basically how it works. But the lower you go in terms of offset, in terms of millivolts of course, the higher the frequency will boost, because you have kind of lower power draw, so inside that same power limit, again the card can boost higher. Let's say that you could go up to minus 100. You have a really good model and you can go up to minus 100. You got the luck of the draw and you have a really good sample again, and you can go to minus 100. So instead of going to let's say like 3.2 GHz, you can now go up to 3.4 GHz, because again, you're undervolting, and at that same frequency you have lower power draw, meaning that the card can increase the GPU frequency in order to reach that same power draw that you had before. Now, as for the maximum frequency offset, for you guys, and especially for you guys that just want to undervolt the card, meaning that you want close to stock performance but with much lower power draw, instead of having, let's say, 300 watts, you want like 250, you want like 260 watts, so you want close to stock performance but with way lower power draw. I tested it and it can be achieved, but it is not achieved with a maximum frequency offset, and to be honest, you don't really need this. Unless you have a model that can go up to, let's say, 400 watts and you really want to overclock it, this menu that you see here, maximum frequency offset, is useless. I tried to mess around with it, going to like minus 200 and so on in order to just undervolt, and yeah, it just doesn't work. At least alone, with these settings, it just doesn't work. And I tried like 100 maximum offset, and it does work to a certain extent, but it isn't needed, because as soon as you leave it at 0 but just go to undervolting, the frequency will raise automatically. So again, unless you have a model that can really boost to higher, very high frequencies, let's say like 3.6 GHz, and the card has more power room but won't go, let's say, over 3.4, but you want it to go over 3.4, then you use the maximum frequency offset, because the card has a certain frequency limit, so it is not endless. And I believe that some models will top at like 3.4 gigahertz. If that's the case and you want 3.5, then you go to plus 100 megahertz. If you want 3.6, then you go to plus 200 megahertz. But for normal models up to 3.4 gigahertz, I would say, because I saw my model going up to 3.35, yes, 3.35 gigahertz automatically with no maximum frequency offset whatsoever. Yeah, you don't really need the maximum offset slider. You can just leave it at 0 and only mess around with the voltage offset. That's how it works in terms of overclocking. As for the VRAM tuning, I believe this is the most, or let's say the easiest part. And as you can see, it comes at 2518 megahertz. And yeah, I believe that you can just go to 2614. 2614, it means we need a slight offset of 14 megahertz in this card as well. And going to 2614 means that you will have 2600 megahertz, like really that round number on MS Afterburner. That's how it works. It has a 14 megahertz offset. I don't really know why, but again, that's how it works. And I found my card to be able to do 2700, but at 2700 it was kind of unstable, giving me some black screens from time to time. So I went down to 2600, which doesn't really affect the performance that much. What you can do though is, instead of using the default timings, you can use the fast timings. That will give you better performance in some titles. Not in all titles, but in some games, the fast timings will increase the performance. Now, I can use the fast timings, my card can use the fast timings, and it won't crash, but generally, I mean, if you don't really want to sacrifice stability, just don't do it, because it will give you like 1 or 2 FPS more, like 1% more performance or 2% more performance tops, and generally, again, it isn't worth it. So just keep it at default. Try to go to 2614 megahertz, which is 2600 megahertz in reality, and I believe that it will work for like 90+% of people. Only the ones that have really bad luck won't be able to do 2600 megahertz. If you have a good model, let's try, for example, 2664, so 50 megahertz more. If you don't really have any kind of black screens, no crashes, no issues, no jittering whatsoever, if the games are playing fine, smooth, no stuttering and so on, then you can try a bit higher, like 2714, and you can keep raising the frequency till it gives you crashes, black screens, blue screens and so on. I believe that 2700 should be the best point for most people, and the stable point for most people should be 2600 megahertz, again with a 14 megahertz offset. And now for the ones that came for the undervolting part. When messing around with the RX 7000 series or the RX 6000 series, when you wanted to undervolt, you could mess again with the voltage. That's common. But since you had the maximum frequency and minimum frequency sliders, you could just limit the maximum frequency to a certain amount. Imagine that the card was reaching 3 GHz at 400 watts. If you put the maximum frequency to, let's say, 2.4 GHz, the power draw would automatically drop from, let's say, 400 watts, from, Jesus, I'm stuttering, from 400 watts to 300 watts or 350 watts. So as soon as you limited the maximum frequency, it would go automatically down. And that's how the previous cards work. RDNA 2, RDNA 3, or basically RX 6000 series and 7000 series. Since you don't really have a maximum frequency slider here, and the frequency offset doesn't really work, and sorry about my English, I'm really tired today. If I'm not actually making myself clear, just leave your doubts in the comment section and I'll answer them as fast as I can. Since we don't really have a maximum frequency that we can lock the card to in order to reduce the power draw, which is something that most of you want near stock performance with way less power draw, you need to go to the power tuning. You can go to, let's say, instead of 10%, you can go to minus 10%. And as soon as you go to minus 10%, yeah, the power draw will automatically go down. And if the power draw goes down, the clock frequency will also go down. And that's why undervolting is very important, because imagine that the card is at stock at 2.8 gigahertz and you decrease the power limit, it means that the card will go even lower to, let's say, 2.6. And that means that the performance will get lower. But as soon as you undervolt, it means that again, at the same frequency, your card is using less power, meaning that at the same power it can use a higher frequency. And if that is happening, it means that, for example, if you are undervolting, even using minus 10% power, you can still get the same frequency you had at stock because you are undervolting. Imagine that you go minus 15% of power limit, and the card goes from, let's say, 315 watts to, let's say, 260 watts. In that case scenario, the frequency will drop a lot, meaning that the performance will also drop. But since you are undervolting, it means that the frequency will also slightly increase, because again, you are using less power with the same frequency, meaning that the frequency of the card can increase. And that's how it works. If you want to undervolt, you kind of need to reduce the power limits and then reduce the voltage in order to have near stock performance at way lower power draw. Yeah, that's it. So again, the most important thing for both overclocking and undervolting is the power tuning. That's how you deal with these cards with RDNA 4. That's how it works. And then, kind of a complement to the power limit, you have the voltage offset. The lower you can go here in terms of voltage offset, the more the maximum frequency will increase. If you can go up to, let's say, minus 30, the maximum frequency might increase up to 100 megahertz, depending on the title, resolution, and so on. If you go to minus 50, it might increase up to 150 megahertz or, let's say, 200 megahertz. If you are able to go to minus 100, it might increase from, let's say, 200 megahertz to 300 megahertz. Meaning that if you have such an increase with undervolting, you can reduce the power limit and then have the same performance as stock with way lower power draw, or have way better performance with way more power draw. That's your choice. That's how it works. Undervolting, overclocking. For me, my settings are these ones. For gaming, minus 40 for stability, 2600 megahertz on the VRAM, and power limit to the maximum, in this case 10%. It might seem confusing for you guys that don't really know how this works, but actually overclocking or tweaking RDNA 4 GPUs is much easier than overclocking and tweaking the RX 7000 series and the 6000 series GPUs. RDNA 4 or the 9000 series is just much easier to tweak. I mean, it's just one slider, voltage offset, and power tuning in the play, and the VRAM is kind of a complement only, so yeah. And well guys, that's all for this video. Hope you enjoyed the video. Leave your comments in the comment section and let me know if you have any doubts. Again, I was really tired and I am really tired. I need to sleep quite a bit or some more. And if you have any doubts, again, just leave them in the comment section, because I might not have explained some parts the way that I wanted to. I was looking at a fly that is there in the ceiling. I might not have explained exactly what I wanted to, because again, I'm tired, and since I'm also having to translate from Portuguese to English in order to give you guys what you need, it is when I'm tired that the lack of words come up. So if you have any doubts, again, leave them in the comment section and I'll answer as soon as possible. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. And as usual, you now have some stock, undervolting, and overclocking comparisons. Enjoy.